The blood on her hands had not yet dried when Cyrilla Ironbark pushed open the castle gates. It was the kind of night that tasted like iron and prophecy, the moon swollen and low, pressing its silver weight against the earth as though it, too, knew what was coming. The wind carried the scent of pine and frost and something ancient, the way the world always smelled after death had been dealt and the balance of power had shifted forever. Cyrilla's white hair clung to her temples in damp, bloodied strands. Her armor bore the marks of crawling through enemy trenches, of pressing her body flat against cold earth while sentries passed mere inches above her. Her boots were caked in mud and ash, and in her left hand she carried a leather sack, heavy and terrible, the proof of what she had done alone in the darkness while her kingdom slept. She had killed the enemy commander. She had ended the war. And she had done it without a single soldier beside her, without permission, without farewell, because she had looked at the maps spread across the war table and seen what no one else could see. The hairline fracture in the enemy's formation, the one night when the stars and the guard rotations and the river currents aligned just so, offering a window so narrow that only one person could slip through it. One person, moving like smoke, thinking like a blade. Her. Cyrilla climbed the stone steps of the keep, her breath ragged, her ribs aching where she had taken an elbow during the silent struggle in the commander's tent. She could still feel the moment when his eyes had opened in the darkness, wide and white with terror, and she had pressed her hand over his mouth and whispered the words that would be the last thing he ever heard. "This is for every child your army orphaned." Then the blade. Then silence. Then the severing, quick and precise, because she needed proof. She had imagined this return 100 times during the long crawl back through enemy territory. She had imagined the horns sounding, the gates swinging wide, the warriors dropping to their knees not in submission, but in awe. She had imagined Uldrilus, her husband, her alpha king, running to meet her, lifting her in his arms, his golden eyes blazing with pride and disbelief and love. She had imagined celebration. She had imagined glory. She had imagined home. But home, she was about to learn, had been burning long before she left. The castle was quiet in the way that felt wrong. Not the peaceful quiet of rest, but the held-breath quiet of a secret being kept. The guards at the inner gate would not meet her eyes. One of them, a young wolf named Brennan, who had always looked at her with something close to worship, turned his face away as she passed, and she saw his jaw clench with something that looked like shame. "Where is the Alpha King?" she asked. Silence. "Where is my husband?" Brennan's throat moved. "In your chambers, my Luna." There was something in his voice, a fracture, a flinch, that made the hair on the back of her neck rise. She had spent her entire life reading the small betrayals of tone and gesture, the micro-expressions that preceded ambush. It was this gift that had made her the greatest strategist the pack had ever known. And now, standing in her own castle, still carrying the severed head of the enemy that had terrorized them for years, she felt that gift turn inward like a blade. She climbed the stairs. Each step was a heartbeat. Each heartbeat was a question. The torches along the corridor guttered in some unseen draft, casting long, writhing shadows that seemed to reach for her as she passed. She could hear something now, soft, muffled, rhythmic. And her body understood what it was before her mind allowed the thought to form. She reached the door to her chambers. Her hand found the iron handle. She pushed it open. And the world ended. Uldrilus Ironbark lay in their bed, the bed where they had planned wars, whispered strategies, where he had once held her through the nightmares that followed her first kill. His golden hair was spread across the pillow she had embroidered with their bonding sigil. His body was tangled with another, skin against skin, breath against breath, and the other body belonged to Hallen. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, please consider clicking the link in the pinned comment to check out our Patreon and become a member. As a member, You'll get access to exclusive content you won't find here on YouTube, extended stories, special scenes, early access to new episodes, and complete romance arcs created just for our supporters. As a bonus, you'll also unlock exclusive vampire romance stories, diving into darker, more intense love stories filled with desire, danger, and passion. By joining, you're directly supporting the channel and helping us bring even more immersive stories to life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. Helen, her best friend, her sister in all but blood, the woman who had braided Cirilla's hair before her bonding ceremony, the woman who had held Cirilla's hand when the first wave of enemy attacks had killed 30 of their youngest warriors, and Cirilla had wept until her body shook, the woman who knew every scar on Cirilla's soul, every crack in her armor, every secret fear that lived in the space between her ribs. Helen, in Cirilla's bed, with Cirilla's mate. The leather sack slipped from her fingers and hit the stone floor with a dull, wet sound. Uldralis's eyes snapped open. For one crystalline moment, everything was frozen. The three of them locked in a triangle of horror and recognition, the moonlight streaming through the window and painting them all in silver. The silence so absolute that Cirilla could hear the blood rushing through her own veins. Then Helen screamed, and Uldralis sat up, the sheets pooling at his waist, and his mouth opened. And the words that came out were not, "I'm sorry." They were not even silence, which would have at least had the dignity of shame. What he said was, "You were supposed to be gone." 5 words. 5 small, ordinary words that rearranged the architecture of everything Cirilla had ever believed about her life. Not, "I missed you." Not, "Thank the moon you're alive." Just the cold, clinical observation that her return was inconvenient, that she had disrupted the schedule of his betrayal. "I killed the enemy commander," Cirilla said, and her voice came from somewhere far away, somewhere beneath the ocean floor of her grief. "I crossed their territory alone. I cut his throat in his own tent. I brought his head back so our children would never have to fear." She looked at Helen, who was clutching the sheets to her chest with trembling hands, and then back at Uldralis. "And I came home to this." "Cirilla," Helen began. "Don't." The word was a blade. "Don't say my name, not with his taste still on your lips." Uldralis swung his legs over the side of the bed, reaching for his clothes with the casual ease of a man who had done this many times before. "You're being dramatic. This changes nothing about the pack. You are still Luna. You still have your title and your war rooms and your precious strategies." "This changes nothing?" Cirilla's voice cracked, and the crack was not weakness. It was the sound of something ancient and terrible breaking free. "You destroyed our bond. You defiled our bed. You betrayed me with the one person I trusted as much as myself." "It was comfort," Helen whispered. "While you were gone, we didn't know if you'd come back. We were afraid. You were afraid." Cirilla's laugh was the loneliest sound the castle walls had ever absorbed. "I was crawling through mud and blood and darkness, alone, for you. For all of you. And you were afraid. So you climbed into my bed with my husband." She looked at Uldralis, truly looked at him, and for the first time in their years together, she saw him clearly. Not the Alpha King she had loved, not the golden warrior who had promised her forever under the bonding moon, but a small, selfish man who had never deserved the crown she had fought to protect. "How long?" she asked. Neither of them answered. "How long?" Helen's eyes dropped. 3 months. 3 months. 90 days of deception. Every kiss he had given her in those 3 months had been a lie. Every time he had touched her hand across the war table, his fingers had carried the ghost of someone else's skin. Something inside Cirilla Ironbark completed. As though every trial, every battle, every sleepless night of strategy and sacrifice had been leading to this single crystalline moment of absolute clarity. She had spent her life protecting others. She had given everything, her youth, her sleep, her body, her brilliance, to a man who saw her not as a partner, but as a convenience, a weapon to be deployed and then set aside while he amused himself with softer company. No more. "You have both committed treason," Cyrilla said, and her voice was forged iron, cold and absolute. "The bond between Alpha and Luna is sacred. It is the foundation upon which the pack's stability rests. You have not merely betrayed me as a wife. You have endangered every wolf who depends on the strength of our union." "Cyrilla, please." Hallin's voice broke into a sob. "Under the old laws, the violation of a bonded pair by either mate is punishable by death. The violation of that bond by both the Alpha and a member of the inner circle constitutes an act of destabilization against the pack itself." She reached for the blade at her hip, the same blade that still carried the enemy commander's blood. "I have spent this night defending our people. I will spend the rest of it cleaning the rot from within." Uldrilis's eyes widened. For the first time, she saw fear in them. Real fear, the kind that strips away pretense and reveals the creature beneath. "You wouldn't dare. I am your Alpha." "You were my Alpha," Cyrilla whispered. "You were my mate. You were my world, and you threw it all away for something as small as comfort." What happened next was swift and absolute. The castle woke to the sound of howling, not in grief, but in recognition, the way wolves howl when they feel the shift of power in their bones. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the truth had spread through every corridor and chamber. The Alpha King was dead. The Luna's best friend was dead. And Cyrilla Ironbark stood alone in a room that smelled of blood and betrayal, holding the weight of a kingdom on shoulders that had never been allowed to rest. When the council gathered at dawn, they found the enemy commander's head displayed on the war table beside the evidence of the Alpha's infidelity, love letters, tokens, the testimonies of servants who had known and been too afraid to speak. The juxtaposition was devastating. On one side, proof of Cyrilla's impossible courage. On the other, proof of Uldrilis's weakness and treachery. There was no debate. The warriors who had fought beside Cyrilla knelt one by one. The elders who had dismissed her brilliance for years finally bowed their heads. The pack, wounded and stunned, turned its face toward the only leader who had ever truly fought for them. And Cyrilla Ironbark, white-haired and blood-stained and utterly alone, took the throne. But this, all of this, was not the beginning. To understand the woman who stood in that room of death and dawn, we must go back. Back before the throne, before the war, before the betrayal. Back to the very first breath of the story, when Cyrilla Ironbark was not a queen, but a girl with snow-white hair, and a mind that terrified everyone who came close enough to see it clearly. She was born in a storm. Not a metaphorical storm, though the metaphor would prove apt, a real one, the kind that tears ancient oaks from the earth and turns rivers into serpents of mud and fury. The healers said later that the lightning struck the birthing hall 3 times during her delivery, and each time the candles blew out, and each time they were relit, the baby had not cried. She came into the world in silence, her eyes wide open, as though she were already observing, already calculating. Her mother, Alara Ironbark, died holding her. Cyrilla's father, a beta named Corwin who had loved his wife with the kind of devotion that leaves a man hollow when it's taken away, looked at his newborn daughter with eyes that held both wonder and ruin. She had her mother's pale skin, luminous as moonlight, and hair that was white from the moment it appeared. Not the white of age, but the white of winter, of bleached bone, of things that have been touched by forces beyond ordinary understanding. "She looks like a ghost," the midwife whispered, and there was fear in her voice. "She looks like her mother," Corwin said quietly, and he lifted the silent baby to his chest and made her a promise. "I will make sure the world sees what you are." But the world had its own ideas about what Cyrilla Ironbark was. She grew up in the margins of the Ironbark pack, loved by her father and regarded with suspicious fascination by everyone else. Her white hair marked her as different in a community that valued uniformity, and her silence, for she was a quiet child, given more to watching than to speaking, was mistaken for emptiness rather than depth. The other pups called her Ghost Girl and Winter Child, and sometimes when they thought she could not hear, Wrong Wolf. She could always hear. She could always see. By the time she was 7, she had memorized the patrol routes of every guard in the territory. By 9, she could read the weather 3 days in advance. By 12, she had discovered a flaw in the pack's eastern border defense that had gone unnoticed for decades, and had brought it to the attention of the War Council with a hand-drawn map so detailed that the Master of Arms had stared at it for a full minute before asking, "How old are you?" 12, Cyrilla had said. "The ravine needs to be blocked with a double palisade and a signal fire at the ridge. I've calculated the optimal placement based on sight lines and wind patterns." She was dismissed. Not because she was wrong, she was right, and everyone in that room knew it, but because the men who held power were not ready to admit that the most brilliant tactical mind in their territory belonged to a girl who looked like a winter spirit. Her father trained her in secret. Corwin recognized in his daughter a gift so rare it frightened him. Not the gift of brute force, which the pack valued above all else, but the gift of seeing patterns, of reading the invisible architecture of conflict. He taught her sword work in the clearing behind their home, at dawn, when the mist was thick enough to hide them. He taught her to move silently through the forest, to track by scent and sound, but mostly, he taught her to trust her own mind. "They will try to make you small," he told her one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and amber. "They will tell you that your ideas are too bold, too dangerous, and when you prove them wrong, and you will, they will resent you for it." "Then why should I try?" she asked. She was 14 then, bruised from a sparring session with boys twice her size. Corwin looked at his daughter, and in her pale eyes he saw the same fire that had burned in her mother's. "Because you were not born to be small," he said. "You were born in a storm, Cyrilla. Storms don't apologize for their thunder." She carried those words like a shield through the years that followed. At 16, she underwent her first shift. Most young wolves shifted in agony and chaos. Cyrilla shifted in silence. One moment she was a girl kneeling in the moonlight. The next she was a wolf. Pure white, lean and long-limbed, with eyes like chips of frozen sky. The elders who witnessed it exchanged uneasy glances. A white wolf who shifted without sound was something from the old stories, the ones that spoke of wolves touched by the moon goddess herself. And then, at 18, she met Uldrylis. He came as part of a diplomatic delegation from the neighboring Golden Ridge pack. 22, already an alpha, tall and broad-shouldered with hair like burnished gold and eyes that held the amber warmth of autumn. The bonding was arranged by the councils, a strategic union designed to merge two powerful territories. But Uldrylis was charming. On the first night of the negotiations, he sought her out in the library where she was studying old battle maps, and he said something no alpha had ever said to her before. "I hear you're the real strategist of this pack. I'd like to learn from you." It was such a small thing, a sentence, a handful of words, but it cracked open a door that Cyrilla had kept bolted for years. She had never been seen before, not really. She fell in love the way a dam breaks, slowly at first, with hairline fractures spreading through the structure, and then all at once, in a rush so overwhelming that it rewrote the landscape of everything she knew. They were bonded under the full moon. She became Luna, and for the first time in her life, she felt that she belonged. The early years were golden. Uldrylis gave her a seat at the War Council, defended her authority, and listened when she presented her strategies. The quiet girl who had been called Ghost and Wrong Wolf became a Luna of rare power and presence. The pups adored her because she remembered every one of their names. The elders respected her. The warriors followed her because she never asked them to take a risk she would not take herself. She was happy, truly, deeply happy, in the way that only people who have known profound loneliness can be, with a gratitude so fierce it bordered on desperation. She did not notice when old Drylus stopped looking at her the way he used to. She did not notice because she was too busy saving them. The threat had been building for years, a rogue coalition of wolf packs from the northern wastes, united under a brutal warlord named Fenric the Flayed, who earned his name from what he did to the alphas he defeated. Fenric's army was vast and growing, and every month brought new reports of border skirmishes, of small packs swallowed whole. Cyrilla saw the pattern before anyone else. She presented her findings to the War Council in a series of reports that were masterpieces of strategic analysis. "He is not raiding," she told them. "He is conquering, and he is moving south. If we do not act within 3 months, he will reach our northern border with a force we cannot repel." The council debated. Uldrillis listened, nodded, and then did what he always did in the face of genuine danger. He hesitated. This was the crack Cyrilla had never allowed herself to see. Uldrillis was a peacetime king. He was magnificent at ceremonies and diplomacy. But when the stakes were real, he faltered. He waited for someone else to shoulder the terrible burden of action. He waited for her. And she carried it. She designed the defense plans, organized the militia, negotiated with allies for reinforcements, and spent night after night in the war room while her husband slept. Or, as she would later learn, did not sleep alone. It was during one of these sleepless nights that the idea came to her. Fenric's army was formidable, but Fenric himself was the keystone. He ruled through fear, and the coalition was held together not by loyalty, but by terror. Remove Fenric, and the coalition would fragment, a classic decapitation strategy, impossibly dangerous. Fenric's camp was deep in enemy territory, ringed by sentries and wards. A conventional assault would be suicidal, but a single infiltrator, someone small, fast, silent, and lethally intelligent, might succeed where an army would fail. She studied the maps for 3 more nights. She traced patrol routes, calculated distances, accounted for weather, terrain, guard rotations, the phase of the moon. She ran the numbers again and again, looking for the flaw that would prove the plan impossible. She could not find one. She could not tell anyone. Uldrillis would forbid it. The council would argue for weeks, and the window would close. The warriors would insist on coming, and their presence would guarantee detection. This was a mission for one. She spent the final days in a strange state of heightened awareness. She noticed everything: the morning light on the training grounds, the sound of children laughing, the smell of bread baking. She memorized these things with the tenderness of a woman who was not certain she would experience them again. She wrote 3 letters, one to the council, explaining her plan, one to her father, thanking him for every dawn spent in the mist, and one to Uldrillis, telling him she loved him and asking him to be the leader she believed he could be. She did not know that while she wrote that letter, he was in their bed with Howlin. On the night of the new moon, Cyrilla left through the servants' passage, shifted into her white wolf, and ran north. The journey took 3 days. She moved at night and hid during the day, burrowing into snowdrifts, her white fur rendering her invisible against the winter landscape. She ate from supplies she had hidden along the route weeks before. On the second night, she encountered an enemy patrol. 3 wolves, moving through birch forest. She pressed herself flat against the ground, her body so still that snow settled on her fur without disturbing a single flake. They passed within 10 feet. One paused, lifted his nose to the wind. But the wind was in her favor, and after a long, terrible moment, the wolf moved on. By the 3rd night, she reached Fenric's camp. She spent 6 hours observing from a ridge above, tracking guard movements, identifying gaps, mapping the route to Fenric's tent. She timed the guard changes to the second. Then, in the darkest hour before dawn, she moved. She slipped through the perimeter like water through a sieve. She shifted to human form to navigate the narrow spaces between tents, moving with a dancer's precision, her white hair covered by a dark hood, her blade drawn. She had brought a compound derived from nightshade and moonflower, which, when introduced to an open flame, produced a colorless vapor that induced deep sleep within seconds. She crept to the brazier beside the tent's rear wall and introduced the compound. Within 3 minutes, the guards were unconscious. She entered the tent. Fenric the Flayed was smaller than she had imagined. Lean, scarred, with the hard, hungry face of a wolf who had fought for every scrap of power. He slept on a bed of furs, and his breathing was shallow and restless, as though even in sleep he could sense the world shifting around him. Cyrilla stood over him, and in that moment, she felt not triumph, but a profound sadness. This man had destroyed so much, and he was so ordinary. She pressed her hand over his mouth. His eyes opened. "This is for every child your army orphaned," she whispered. The blade was quick. The silence that followed was absolute. She did what needed to be done next, and then she was gone, running south with the weight of victory in one hand and the weight of what she had done in her heart. She ran for 2 days without stopping, driven by exhaustion and the desperate, burning need to be home, to be safe, to collapse into the arms of the man she loved. She did not know that she was running toward something worse than war. And now, we return to the room of blood and moonlight, to the moment when Cyrilla Ironbark stood over the bodies of her husband and her betrayer, and felt the last vestiges of the old Cyrilla drain away like water from a shattered vessel. She did not weep. She had earned the right to weep, but she did not, because weeping was for women who had time for grief, and Cyrilla Ironbark had a kingdom to hold together. She bathed, she dressed. She braided her white hair into the intricate warrior's crown that signified a leader preparing for ceremony. She put on the armor she had worn into enemy territory, still bearing mud and blood, because she wanted the pack to see exactly who she was and what she had done, and at what cost. Then she walked into the great hall and told them everything. The days that followed were a crucible. There were those who mourned Oldrelus, who questioned Cyrilla's right to execute her mate. Cyrilla met them with the same unshakable calm. She opened the war room to every wolf who wished to see the evidence. She invited the council to review the old laws. She stood before the pack and answered every question with transparency, concealing nothing, excusing nothing. One by one, the doubters fell silent. Not because they were silenced. Cyrilla would never rule through fear, but because the truth was so overwhelming that resistance required a willful blindness even the most stubborn wolves could not sustain. The coronation was held under the full moon, in the ancient circle of standing stones. Cyrilla knelt on the cold stone, her white hair loose, and the eldest elder placed the iron circlet on her brow. "By blood and bone and moonlight, we name you Alpha. Rise and lead." She rose, and she led. The years that followed were years of rebuilding and quiet greatness. Without Fenric, the Northern Coalition collapsed exactly as Cyrilla had predicted. She used the breathing room to transform her pack from a defensive stronghold into a thriving kingdom. She reformed the military, replacing rigid hierarchy with a merit-based system. She established a training academy for young strategists. She opened trade routes, negotiated resource-sharing agreements, and invested in infrastructure that connected the settlements of her territory into a cohesive whole. Under her rule, the Ironbark territory became the most stable and prosperous region in the known world. Wolves from other packs sought refuge within her borders. Her court became a hub of learning and culture. She was, by every external measure, a magnificent success. And she was utterly, devastatingly alone. The solitude was not something she spoke about. It lived in the small hours of the morning, in the silence that filled her chambers when the last candle had been extinguished, in the cold center of the bed where another body should have been. It lived in the way she sometimes caught herself reaching for a hand that was not there. She had sealed herself behind walls of competence and authority, and those walls kept her safe, but they also kept her imprisoned. Her advisors suggested matches. She declined them all. Eventually, the suggestions stopped, and the pack accepted that their alpha queen would rule alone. Cyrilla accepted it too. She told herself that solitude was the price of the throne, and that a woman who had survived what she had survived did not need something as fragile and unreliable as love. She told herself this so many times that she almost believed it. Marvin Tombstone arrived on a Tuesday. This detail mattered to Cyrilla later, because it was such an ordinary day. A gray Tuesday in late autumn that smelled of damp leaves and wood smoke. She was in the war room reviewing supply reports when her steward announced that the Alpha King of the Grave Hallow territory had arrived to discuss a potential alliance. She set aside her reports, straightened her circlet, and went to the Great Hall. He was standing in the center of the room, and the first thing she noticed was that he was not what she expected. She had expected another Uldralis, golden, charming, polished. She had expected performance. Marvin Tombstone was none of these things. He was tall, taller than any wolf she had met, with broad shoulders, and the kind of build that spoke of years of real combat. His hair was dark, nearly black, shot through with streaks of silver at the temples. His face was angular and strong, with a jaw that could have been cut from granite and eyes. Oh, his eyes. The deep shifting gray of thunderclouds, holding a quiet intensity that made something in Cyrilla's chest tighten in a way she had not felt in years. He was not handsome in the conventional sense. He was something more unsettling. He was compelling, the kind of man you could not look away from, not because he demanded attention, but because his presence rearranged the gravity of the room. He wore his armor like a second skin, dark leather and iron, scarred and functional. A long sword hung at his hip, and his hands, large, scarred, capable, rested at his sides with the relaxed readiness of a man who could draw that sword in a heartbeat. But it was his eyes that undid her. When he looked at her, really looked, not the cursory glance of a diplomat, but the deep, searching gaze of someone seeing another person for the first time. Something happened that Cyrilla had long since stopped believing was possible. Something clicked, as though two pieces of a mechanism separated for years suddenly locked into place with a bone-deep rightness. She felt it in her wolf before she felt it in her mind. The animal within her, the white wolf coiled in watchful solitude for so long, lifted its head and made a sound she had never heard it make. Not a growl, not a howl, but something softer, trembling at the edge of recognition. Mate. No. Impossible. She shoved the thought down with ruthless efficiency. She had been mated once, and the bond had been a cage disguised as a garden. Alpha Queen Ironbark, Marvin said, and his voice was deep and rough, like stones tumbling in a riverbed. He inclined his head, not a bow, but a nod of genuine respect. Thank you for receiving me. I've heard remarkable things about your kingdom. Alpha King Tombstone, welcome to Ironbark. I trust your journey was uneventful. Eventful enough. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, brief, almost reluctant, as though he were not accustomed to smiling. Your mountain passes are well guarded. My scouts were turned back twice. That is by design. I know, it's impressive. There was no flattery in his voice. No charm, no performance. Just a statement of fact delivered with the directness of a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. The first evening was torture dressed as diplomacy. They dined in the Great Hall, surrounded by the formal rituals of interpack relations. Cyrilla performed her role with flawless composure, revealing nothing of the earthquake happening behind her eyes. But she could not stop noticing Marvin. She noticed how he listened, not with impatient half-attention, but with focused stillness that made the speaker feel like the only person in the room. She noticed how he spoke to her servants with the same respect he gave her advisors, asking their names, thanking them by those names. She noticed the scar from his left ear to the corner of his jaw. She noticed the way his hands moved when he described his territory, expansive gestures that contradicted his controlled demeanor, as though the landscape he loved was too vast for words alone. And she noticed that he was noticing her too. Not with predatory assessment, but with something quieter and more dangerous. Genuine curiosity, the kind that wanted to understand rather than possess. After dinner, when the hall was empty, Marvin found her in the corridor. "Walk with me?" he asked. It was not a command. It was an offering. Take it or leave it. And that was precisely what made it disarming. They walked through the castle gardens in cold, clear starlight, and for a long time neither spoke, and the silence was not awkward, but companionable. The shared quiet of two people who had learned that words are not always the highest form of communication. Marvin broke the silence first. "I lost my mate 4 years ago. Her name was Sarah. She died in childbirth, and the child died with her." Cyrilla stopped walking. In the starlight, his face was open and raw, the face of a man who had chosen to show his wound rather than hide it. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it with every cell of her body. "I ruled alone after that. People told me I should find a new mate, produce heirs. They talked about it the way they talk about breeding horses." He paused. "I couldn't. I tried to want someone. I tried to feel something. And I couldn't. Until," Cyrilla asked, and the word escaped before she could stop it. Marvin looked at her. "I didn't say until. You didn't have to. You wouldn't be telling me this if there hadn't been an until." The corner of his mouth twitched. "They told me you were brilliant. They understated it." Cyrilla felt something crack inside her. Not break, but crack. The way ice cracks when the first warmth of spring reaches it. "I killed my mate," she said. She had never said the words like that before. Plain, unadorned, stripped of context and justification. Marvin did not flinch. He did not step back. He looked at her with something that might have been understanding, because he too carried a weight the world could see but could not comprehend. "I know the story," he said quietly. "You did what the law demanded and your conscience required. I have no judgment to offer you, Cyrilla. Only respect." It was the first time he had used her name, and the sound of it in his deep, rough voice did something to her that she was not prepared to name. They walked for another hour. They talked about strategy, governance, the peculiar loneliness of being surrounded by people who need you, but do not know you. Cyrilla told him about the night she infiltrated Fenric's camp, about the moment she stood over the sleeping warlord and felt not triumph, but sorrow. She had never told anyone about the sorrow. "You carry too much alone," Marvin said, as they stood at the edge of the garden, looking out over the moonlit valley. "There's no one else to carry it." There could be. She turned to face him, and the distance between them had narrowed without either of them noticing, and his gray eyes were close and deep, and full of something that made her wolf press against her ribs with an insistence that bordered on pain. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know enough. I know that you fight alone, because you've never had someone worth fighting beside. I know that you rule from behind walls, because the last person you let inside tried to destroy you. And I know that when you looked at me in the Great Hall today, something happened that scared you, because it scared me too. I can't do this again," she said, and her voice broke on the last word, just enough to show him the terrified woman behind the Iron Queen. "If I trust again and I know, and I'm not asking you to trust me tonight or tomorrow. I'm asking you to let me stay a little longer. Let me earn it." She looked at this scarred, quiet man who had lost everything and rebuilt himself from the ruins. and she saw something she had never seen in Uldralus. Not charm, but character. Not performance, but presence. Not easy warmth, but the hard-won gentleness of a man who had suffered greatly and chosen tenderness anyway. "One more week," she said. It was not a yes. It was not a no. It was the sound of ice cracking in the first warmth of an unexpected spring. The week that followed was unlike anything Cyrilla had experienced. Marvin did not court her with gifts and flattery. He simply existed beside her, quietly and consistently, like a fire that burned steadily rather than spectacularly. He asked to observe her war council. Afterward, he said, "Your analysis of the eastern border vulnerability is correct, but you're overestimating the enemy's cavalry capacity. They lost most of their horse stock in the northern floods last season." She stared at him. "How do you know that?" "I have scouts in the region. I can share their reports with you if you'd like." He was offering her intelligence, not as a bargaining chip, but as a gift, the gift of knowledge, which was the only gift Cyrilla had ever truly valued. Something shifted inside her, but it was what happened at the training grounds the next day that stayed with her. One of the younger warriors, a 16-year-old girl named Ayla, who had recently lost her father, stumbled and cut her palm on the gravel. The other warriors barely glanced at her. Marvin stopped mid-conversation, crossed the yard, knelt beside the girl, and examined her hand with the careful attention of a healer. "It's not deep," he told her, wrapping a strip of cloth around the cut. "You're favoring your left side when you lunge. That's what threw your balance." He spent 20 minutes correcting her form. When she thanked him, flushed with pride, he ruffled her hair and said, "You've got a warrior's heart, little one. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Cyrilla watched from the gallery above, and she felt something dangerous and wonderful happening beneath her ribs. A warmth, a softening, like a flower that has spent years in darkness feeling the first touch of sunlight. This man, this alpha king who could destroy any warrior in combat, whose reputation for ferocity had reached even her distant territory, knelt in the dirt to bandage a girl's hand and teach her to lunge. That duality, that impossible, beautiful duality. On the third night, she found him in the library at midnight. His face, usually so controlled, softened into something that took her breath away when she entered. The look of a man seeing the one thing that made everything else make sense. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "I never sleep well. Too many things to think about." "What are you thinking about tonight?" She considered lying, but the library was warm and golden with candlelight, and his gray eyes held no expectation, only patience, and she was so tired of carrying everything alone. "You," she said. The word hung in the air, brave and terrified. Marvin closed his book. He leaned forward, and the candlelight caught the silver in his hair and the scar on his jaw. "Tell me what you're thinking." "I'm thinking that you scare me. Not because you're dangerous, although you are, enormously, but because you make me feel things I had decided I would never feel again. I built these walls very carefully. They've kept me alive. And you're standing on the other side of them, and you're not trying to break them down. You're just being there. And somehow that's worse, because I can't fight patience. I can't strategize against kindness. I can't defend against a man who kneels in the dirt to help a girl who isn't his own." Marvin stood. He crossed the distance between their chairs and knelt in front of her. This alpha king, this warrior. He knelt on the library floor and looked up at her with those gray eyes and said very quietly, "You don't have to tear down the walls. I'll wait outside them for as long as it takes. And if it takes forever, I'll still be there." "Why?" she whispered. "Because I have looked for you in every room I have entered for 4 years. In every face, every voice, every silence. I have looked for you without knowing what I was looking for. And now that I've found you, I am not so foolish as to walk away, because the timing is complicated. A tear slipped down her cheek. Just one. A single silver track. And Marvin reached up and caught it on his thumb with a tenderness so profound that it shattered something inside her. Not the walls. Not yet. But the belief that the walls were all she had. I'm broken, she said. You're not broken, he said. You're forged. There's a difference. Broken things fall apart. Forged things are stronger at the seams. She saw that he was not Uldrelis. He was real, scarred, imperfect, and profoundly honest. And he was offering her not a crown or a title, but something far more terrifying and far more valuable. Himself. Stay another week, she said. He smiled, a real smile, full and warm, transforming his angular face, and said, I'll stay as long as you'll have me. The second week deepened everything. Marvin told her about his childhood, raised in the harsh Gravehallow Mountains, where winters were so severe that survival was an act of defiance. His father had been a brutal alpha who believed strength was the only virtue and love a weakness to be beaten out of boys. He hit me every time I showed mercy, Marvin said. Every time I helped someone weaker, every time I cried. He wanted to make me hard. Did he succeed? Cyrilla asked. His gray eyes held a complexity she was only beginning to understand. He made me hard toward the world. He made me fierce, the kind of alpha that enemies fear and allies respect. But he failed at the thing he wanted most. He failed to kill the softness. It's still there, Cyrilla. I just learned to protect it, to save it for the people who deserve it. And who deserves it? You, he said simply. You deserve all of it. She watched him over the following days and saw the duality in everything he did. The alpha king who could silence a room with a look, who sparred with controlled ferocity, who discussed military strategy with cold precision. And then the man who brought wildflowers to the old healer, who sat up late with a homesick soldier and talked him through his loneliness, who found a stray kitten in the stables and carried it inside his cloak for an entire afternoon until he found a warm place for it to sleep. He was a storm to the world and a shelter to the few he let close. On the 10th night, on the castle ramparts, Marvin told her about Sarah's death, the blood and the silence that followed, the year of darkness, the drinking, the rages, the nights on the Gravehallow cliffs when he had thought about how easy it would be to step forward. What stopped you? Cyrilla whispered. Duty. Not love, not hope. Just the stubborn fact that thousands of wolves depended on me. He turned to face her, the wind catching his dark hair, the moon painting his scarred face in silver. And then I walked into your great hall, and I looked at you, this white-haired queen with winter in her hair and fire in her eyes. And I felt something I had given up on feeling, and it terrified me. Because I know what it is to lose the person you love. But you're still here. I'm still here. Because you're worth being afraid for. She reached out and touched the scar on his jaw. The first time she had voluntarily touched him. And the contact sent a shockwave through both of them. A tremor in their wolves and their bones, and the deep ancient places where instinct lives. I am afraid too, she said. Every moment. Every time I look at you and feel something open inside me that I thought I had sealed shut forever. Then we'll be afraid together, Marvin said. That's what partnership is. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it side by side. He was supposed to leave on the 14th day. His delegation was packed and ready. The horses were saddled, the farewell gifts exchanged. Cyrilla had spent the morning staring at treaties she could not focus on, feeling the countdown like a physical ache. She told herself she could survive one more goodbye. She descended to the courtyard where his party waited. She saw Marvin standing beside his horse, dressed for travel, his dark cloak billowing, looking at her with those gray thundercloud eyes. Alpha King Tombstone, she said formally, extending her hand. Your visit has been a gift to the Ironbark territory. He took her hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and he did not shake it. He held it, the way you hold something precious. Alpha Queen Ironbark, it has been my honor. She tried to pull her hand back. He did not let go. Don't go, she said. The words burst from her like a confession, raw, unplanned, stripped of every layer of composure. She had not planned to stand in a crowded courtyard and lay her heart on the flagstones like an offering. But the truth has its own schedule, and it does not consult our plans. Marvin's hand tightened. In his gray eyes she saw surprise and hope and a joy so fierce it looked like pain. Say it again, he whispered. Don't go. Stay, not as a diplomat or an ally, but as... She could not finish. The word was too enormous, too loaded with memories of the last time she had given it to someone. Marvin stepped closer. He cupped her face, his palm warm against her cheek, and tilted her chin up so she was looking directly into his eyes. As what, Cyrilla? As mine, she whispered. He kissed her. In front of the entire courtyard, in front of his delegation and her advisors, in the cold autumn wind that tasted of smoke and pine, the Alpha King of Gravehallow kissed the Alpha Queen of Ironbark. It was a homecoming. His mouth was warm and certain, and his hand cradled her face with tenderness that made her ache, and her wolf surged forward with a howl of recognition. She felt the ice shatter. All of it. Every layer. Every wall. And beneath the ice was not the emptiness she had feared, but a fire, banked and waiting, that roared to life at his touch. She kissed him back with everything she had. Every year of solitude, every night of loneliness, every moment she had spent telling herself that love was a luxury she could not afford. When they broke apart, the courtyard was silent. Then someone let out a howl, a single, pure note. And then another joined it, and another, until the entire courtyard was alive with sound, the pack giving voice to a collective joy. Their queen, who had carried them through darkness with nothing but her brilliance and her iron will, had finally found something she had long denied herself. A partner, an equal, a love worthy of her extraordinary heart. That night, they were alone. Cyrilla's chambers were lit by a single fire, and the silver light of the moon through tall windows. They stood facing each other across the room, and the distance between them was charged with everything that had been building for 14 days. I'm terrified, Cyrilla said. I know. So am I. If this goes wrong, it won't. You can't know that. No. But I can know this. I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you. He crossed the room. He stood before her, close enough that she could count the silver threads in his dark hair and trace the map of scars on his hands. He touched her white hair, gently, reverently, the way you touch something sacred. You are the most extraordinary person I have ever met, he said. You are brilliant and fierce and brave and broken in all the places that I am broken, and I have been looking for you my entire life. Cyrilla placed her hand over his heart. Beneath her palm, she felt it beating, strong, steady, real, and the rhythm matched her own, as though their hearts had been keeping time with each other across years and mountains and the vast, lonely distances of their separate griefs. Then stay, she said. He stayed. What happened between them that night was not merely physical, though the physical dimension was shattering in its intensity. It was the vulnerability that undid her, the way he whispered her name like a prayer, the way he paused to push her white hair from her face and look at her and say, "Tell me you're okay. Tell me this is what you want." "This is what I want," she said. And for the first time in years, the words were simply, purely true. And when, in the deepest hour of the night, he pressed his mouth to the curve of her neck and she felt the sharp, sweet pain of his teeth breaking skin, the mark, the bond, the ancient seal. She did not flinch. She leaned into it. She held him tighter, and she felt the bond snap into place like a constellation resolving from scattered stars into a pattern that had always been there, waiting to be seen. She marked him in return, and the sound he made, low, raw, shattered with emotion, was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. They lay together afterward, her head on his chest, their heartbeats locked in the same steady rhythm. The fire had burned low, and the world outside seemed very far away. "I never thought I'd feel this again," Marvin murmured into her hair. "I thought Sarah took it with her. The ability to love like this." Cyrilla traced the scar on his jaw. "I thought Uldrilus destroyed it, that he burned it out of me." "He didn't destroy it. He just made it harder to find. But it was there. It was always there." "How do you know?" "Because you answered the door when I knocked. You could have kept me at arm's length. But you didn't. You let me in. That was your heart, Cyrilla. Surviving, waiting, refusing to give up on the possibility that someone worthy would come." She pressed her face against his chest and let the tears come. Not tears of grief, but tears of release. The kind that fall when a weight you have carried for so long that you forgot it was there is finally, gently, lifted. The news of the bonding spread like wildfire. Some celebrated. The union of two powerful kingdoms promised unprecedented stability. Others whispered that Cyrilla had been seduced, that Marvin was a conqueror in disguise. Cyrilla addressed them with transparent, unflinching honesty. She called a gathering of representatives from every allied territory and laid out the terms in language so clear that even the most skeptical were silenced. The territories would remain distinct, each governed by its own laws. Neither alpha would subsume the other's authority. They would form a council of equals. "I did not survive betrayal and war to surrender my kingdom to another alpha," Cyrilla said, "and Marvin did not cross mountains to conquer what he could partner with. We are not merging our territories. We are joining our strengths." Marvin stepped forward. "I chose this woman because she is the strongest person I have ever known. Stronger than any warrior, any general, any alpha I have fought or allied with. She is fierce beyond measure and kind beyond reason, and she has taught me something I thought I had forgotten. That strength and tenderness are not opposites. They are the same thing, expressed in different languages." The wedding was held in the ancient circle of standing stones, under a full moon so bright it cast shadows sharp as blades. Both packs attended, standing side by side for the first time. Cyrilla wore armor for her wedding, not because she was going to war, but because armor was what she wore when she did the most important things, and she could not imagine facing the most significant moment of her life dressed in anything that suggested she was less than exactly who she was. The vows they exchanged were their own. "I do not promise to be soft," Cyrilla said. "I have never been soft. I promise to be true. I promise to fight beside you, never behind you. I promise to share my mind, my strategy, my strength, and my fear. I promise to let you see me as I am, scarred and stubborn and fierce, and to trust that what you see will be enough." Marvin's eyes glistened. "I do not promise to be gentle with the world. The world does not deserve my gentleness, but I promise to be gentle with you. I promise that the hands that hold a sword will hold you with the same devotion. I promise that the voice that commands armies will whisper your name in the dark with all the tenderness I have kept hidden for years, waiting for someone worthy of it. I promise to protect you, not because you need protection, but because protecting what you love is the most sacred duty a wolf can fulfill." The elder bound their wrists with a cord woven from silver and iron, silver for the moon, iron for the earth, and spoke the ancient words. "By blood and bone and moonlight, I bind these wolves together. What the moon has joined, let no force sunder." Cyrilla felt the bond settle into her like a second heartbeat. She looked at Marvin, and in his gray eyes she saw the future. Not perfect, not without struggle, but shared. A future in which she would never again face the darkness alone. He kissed her under the full moon, and the wolves howled, and the sound rose into the night sky like a hymn. The months that followed were a quiet miracle. Not dramatic, the miracle of two broken people learning to be whole together. It happened in the small moments. In the mornings, when Cyrilla woke to Marvin's warmth and felt a safety she had never known. Not the safety of walls and weapons, but the safety of being truly known and loved anyway. In the war room, where their minds worked in tandem with almost frightening synchronicity, Cyrilla would begin a thought and Marvin would finish it. Their advisors watched with something between admiration and bewilderment. In the training yards, where Marvin sparred with the warriors, and sometimes, when he disarmed an opponent with a particularly elegant maneuver, glanced up at her with a grin so boyish it seemed impossible to reconcile with the fearsome Alpha King. And at night, where the Alpha who commanded with an iron voice became a man of devastating gentleness, where his battle-scarred hands traced her body with reverence, where he held her after nightmares and whispered against her hair, "You're safe. You're home. I'm here." "The pack calls you the Iron Heart," Cyrilla said one night, lying in his arms. "They say you're the fiercest alpha they've ever seen." "And what do you call me?" She traced the line of his jaw. "I call you mine." He smiled, that rare, full smile, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Then that's the only name that matters." In the spring, the combined territories were tested. A new threat from the west, a confederation of rogue wolves under a fanatical alpha who preached destruction of the established order. Cyrilla designed the defense strategy, a masterpiece of layered fortification. Marvin led the warriors, commanding from the front with a ferocity that earned him the fear of every enemy who survived long enough to describe it. He fought like a force of nature, his dark wolf form tearing through enemy lines with speed and savagery that left his own warriors awestruck. He was everywhere at once, his howl cutting through the chaos, rallying his wolves. But it was Cyrilla who won the war. While Marvin held the front, she executed a flanking maneuver so audacious that military scholars would study it for generations. She led a hand-picked force through underground tunnels she had discovered months earlier, emerging behind the enemy's main camp, destroying their supply lines in a single devastating strike. The enemy fragmented within days. Their fanatical alpha challenged Marvin to single combat, a last, desperate gamble. Marvin accepted. Cyrilla watched from the command tent, every muscle taut. She could have forbidden it, but she understood something fundamental about Marvin. His ferocity was not recklessness. It was precision. It was the accumulated power of a man who channeled his strength into exactly the moment it was needed. The combat lasted 7 minutes. When it was over, the fanatical alpha lay defeated, and Marvin stood over him, bleeding from a gash across his ribs but upright. He looked across the battlefield to where Cyrilla stood, her white hair streaming in the wind, and asked her, without words, with just a look, what should be done. She gave the nod. Mercy. It was the decision that defined their reign. Where Uldralis would have hesitated and Fenric would have destroyed, Cyrilla and Marvin showed strength tempered by wisdom, power guided by compassion. The defeated Alpha was exiled. His followers were offered amnesty. Many accepted, becoming some of the most loyal members of the combined pack, grateful to a queen and king who had seen their humanity when no one else would. The victory cemented the alliance as the dominant power in the region. But more importantly, it cemented something between Cyrilla and Marvin, a trust so deep it transcended the bond between their wolves and existed in the realm of pure, chosen love. On the anniversary of their bonding, Marvin took Cyrilla to the Grave Hallow Mountains. They traveled alone, just two wolves running through the wild landscape, their wolves singing to each other in the silent language that only bonded mates could hear. They ran through ancient forests where the canopy blocked the sky, through meadows carpeted with wildflowers, across rivers that sparkled like liquid silver. They reached the hot springs at dusk, a hidden hollow where thermal water filled natural stone pools that steamed in the cool mountain air. The hollow was ringed by ancient pines, and the sky was turning from gold to violet, and the air smelled of minerals and moss. "I used to come here after Sarah died," Marvin said, as they sat in the warm water. "The only place where the grief didn't feel like it was crushing me." Cyrilla leaned against his shoulder. "And now?" "Now it's not about grief. It's about gratitude." He cupped her face in his hands. "Thank you, Cyrilla." "For what?" "For being brave enough to love again. I know what it cost you, and I will spend every day proving that your bravery was not misplaced." She kissed him, and it tasted of mineral water and mountain air and hope. His arms came around her, pulling her against his chest, and she felt his heartbeat against her own, two rhythms that had merged into one. "I used to think I was meant to be alone," she murmured. "That solitude was my destiny, that I was too strong, too sharp, too strange for anyone to truly love." "You are too strong and too sharp," Marvin said, and there was laughter in his voice, and love, so much love. "But you are not too anything for me. You are exactly right. You are exactly what I needed, what I didn't know I was looking for, what I would have searched the entire world to find." She looked at him, this man of storm and tenderness, and she understood with a clarity as bright as starlight that the journey, all of it, the loneliness and the betrayal and the war and the grief, had not been punishment. It had been preparation. Every wound had made her strong enough to recognize real love when it finally came. Every scar had taught her what to look for and what to run from. Every sleepless night had sharpened her vision until she could see, with unerring clarity, the difference between a man who performs love and a man who embodies it. Uldrylis had been a gilded cage. Marvin was the open sky. "I love you," she said, and the words were not strategy, not calculation, not defense. They were surrender, the best kind, the willingness to be fully seen and fully known. "I love you," Marvin said, and his gray eyes held the moonrise and the mountain and the entire vast, beautiful future. "I love you in this moment, and in every moment that follows, and in the moments before, when I didn't know your name but my soul was already searching for yours. Under the mountain sky, in the warm embrace of the ancient springs, two wolves who had each walked through their own particular darkness found in each other the light they had stopped believing existed. The woman who had been called Ghost Girl and Wrong Wolf, who had been betrayed by the two people she trusted most, who had killed an enemy alone in the dark and returned to a shattered world, who had taken a crown she never sought and carried it with grace and ferocity. That woman finally set down the weight she had carried for so long and allowed herself to be held. The man who had been beaten for showing mercy, who had lost his wife and child and stood on the edge of oblivion, who had ruled with an iron hand while hiding a heart so tender it ached. That man finally found a home not in a place, but in a person, and the ferocity that the world feared became, in her presence, the most devoted gentleness. Their kingdoms prospered. Their people thrived. The alliance between Ironbark and Gravehallow became a beacon of stability, and the story of the White Wolf Queen and the Ironheart King passed into legend. A story told to young wolves on winter nights. A story of betrayal and redemption, of war and peace, of the stubborn, miraculous persistence of love in a world that does everything in its power to destroy it. And in the years that followed, when Cyrilla Ironbark Tombstone stood on the ramparts of her castle and looked out over the land she had fought and bled and sacrificed to protect, she no longer stood alone. Beside her, always beside her, was Marvin. His hand in hers, his shoulder against her shoulder, his gray eyes scanning the horizon with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has finally found everything he needs. She had been born in a storm. She had survived a betrayal that would have destroyed lesser souls. She had slain the enemy alone and saved the pack. And then she had done the bravest thing of all. Braver than infiltrating an enemy camp. Braver than taking a throne. Braver than any act of war or governance or sacrifice. She had loved again. And this time, love had kept its promise. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.